Father Seán is the spiritual director of Companions on the Journey. And in 1998, 26 years ago, Seán took an ITP workshop with Barry. Seán asked Barry and me to help him start an ITP group as part of Companions on the Journey in Palo Alto. And at that time, Barry wasn't ready to start a group or help us start a group. But in 2004, he was ready. So he contacted Father Seán and helped us start ITP Palo Alto. And we've been meeting every Saturday for the past 20 years. A few months ago, Barry and Seán started talking about a couple of programs around the evolution of consciousness, and then narrowed it down to programs on the evolution of the species through the lens of body, mind, heart, and soul. So without further ado, I will turn this over to Father Seán.
So I've been apportioned 19 minutes for this section to speak about the soul, mind, body, heart. So I want to start off by just looking at, if I were to ask you, how many degrees are between the freezing point of water and the boiling point of water? Then you'd have to figure out first, which scale do you want to use? If it's centigrade, then there's 100-degree separation from 0 to 100 between freezing and boiling water. But if you were to use a Fahrenheit scale, it would be 180 degrees, between 32 degrees and 212 degrees. And so we have to figure out what templates of body, mind, soul, and spirit are we using when we try to calculate, and calibrate what we mean by these terms. So if you just take the notion of body in a kind of a generic sense, and you look at the impoverished version of body we have in the West, we think the body is like just this single organism with subcomponents like cardiovascular system or musculoskeletal systems, but basically it's one entity. If you go to the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians spoke about two different levels of body, Ka and Ba. One is kind of the physicality of us, and the other is kind of the etheric or the astral level of body. If you go to the Greeks had three different words for it. There was sarx, soma, and pneuma. So sarx is this kind of flesh and blood stuff, and soma is kind of the etheric template of which the sarx is a printout or a hard copy, and then pneuma is the spirit body. And in fact, if you were raised a Christian or a Catholic particularly, and you're trying to wrestle with the notions of resurrection or Eucharist, unless you know this distinction between sarx, soma, and pneuma, you can't understand what Eucharist is about, and you can't understand what resurrection is about. So very famously, in Paul's first letter to the Corinthians in chapter 11, he speaks about a Eucharist, and he says sarx cannot inhabit the kingdom of God. And in chapter 15, he talks about resurrection, and he says sarx cannot inhabit the kingdom of God. So when you're talking about bodily resurrection, you're not talking about flesh and blood stuff. So we have to figure out then, what template are we using when we speak about body, mind, heart, and spirit? I have a personal version of it myself where I think that I call it the three selves. There is what I call, this is the role self. This is the guy playing the part of an Irish priest, with a strange accent. That's the role I'm playing in this incarnation. Then there's a second level I call my soul self. And it's the eternal part of me that was never born and will never die. And maybe has repeated and reincarnated many, many, many times and playing different kinds of roles. So I call that the soul self. And then thirdly, I call it the source self, the ultimate source of which every one of us is simply a holographic fractal. And so there are very, very different templates we can use then when you think about what do body, mind, soul, and spirit mean. My favorite one actually is the Hindu, because they talk about 7 different levels of body. They speak about the physical body, which is vibrating between infrared and ultraviolet, between 400 and 700 nanometers, so we can interact with it through our sensorium. Then the next level up is the etheric body, or the kind of the energy system, again, of which this physical body is simply a hard copy, and that's vibrating at a higher frequency. So sometimes you can see somebody's aura because it's vibrating at a higher frequency than our physicality. And then there's the astral body, which is kind of the place in which our emotions, our heart wisdom resides. It's the place we inhabit when we dream at night. So there's no time and no space at the astral level. You can go forward and backward in time, and you can travel vast distances in your dream state. So, for instance, I can dream about my grandfather who died in 1956, and I can visit him in the place I grew up in, as a little child, 6,000 miles to the east of where I live right now. So at the astral level, there's neither time nor space. And for Hinduism, it's the place where all of the experiences of the incarnation just ending are archived to be picked up on the way back down again on the next incarnation. The fourth level for them is the mental body, the place of ratiocination, Plato's ideal realm, the place of the archetypes. The fifth level would be our psychic body, where we reconnect with our clairvoyant, clairsentient, clairaudient, psychokinetic, telepathic abilities. Then the next level is the soul self, the Atman, and finally there's a Brahman, or cosmic consciousness. So the Hinduism has this beautiful 7-stage model. And many years ago, I created a kind of an analog to that. Okay, I think that Gaia herself has 7 different levels of body. The first level is the physiosphere, which is studied by physics. This third rock from the sun in this particular solar system, which is composed of really hard matter. And then at some stage, this physiosphere developed a second kind of a sheath, which we call the atmosphere. And for me, the atmosphere is literally the womb of the planet. It was the womb that was necessary in order for life to be gestated. So that's the second level for me, the atmosphere. The third level then is the biosphere, which is studied obviously by biology. And this is kind of the place where Gaia continues to gestate flora and fauna of various kinds. The fourth level for me is what Tyler de Chardin would call the noosphere. And it is this sheath of consciousness that surrounds the planet. And it's the stage of Gaia that we find ourselves in right now, it seems to me. And it's a very dangerous place to be. It's almost like this sheath is like the kind of the asteroid belt. So if you want to travel from Earth to Jupiter, it's a minefield of asteroids out there. You have to navigate very, very carefully. And it's the same thing as we move into the noosphere. We begin to see the noosphere through, for instance, the internet and global communication systems. But it is a dangerous place to be as well, because we can use that kind of technology literally to destroy the very planet itself. So I would call that the noosphere. The next level I would call the animasphere. Anima as in soul, that there's a soul sheath around the planet. Because for me, Gaia is the Mahatma, a very, very advanced soul. After that, there is what I call the pneuma sphere. Pneuma as in spirit. So this is the spirit body of the planet. And then finally, there's the cosmosphere, or the divine holographic fractal, of which the planet itself is a fractal. So for me then, it's holographic fractals all the way up and all the way down. So as you know, a hologram is an entity that contains the totality of itself in every one of its component parts. And a fractal is a pattern that repeats at an infinite number of scales. And so that's what we see, I think, when we're talking about this notions of mind, body, soul, and spirit at an individual level, at a kind of a community level, at a global level, and literally at a cosmic level itself. So that's the first thing I would say about it. There are limitations then as we as we devolve down from our original source. And particularly, I think there are 4 kinds of limitations that we sign up for when we volunteer for incarnation in this 3D dense spacesuits of ours. So the 4 limitations are space, mind, time, and amnesia. So we who are literally cosmic beings are now shrunken down to these little, in my case, 150 pounds of a spacesuit. The second kind of one is, we who are cosmic, who have cosmic intelligence as holograms of source itself, are now operating with this little 3-pound kind of computer that we carry between our ears, which is really, really limited. The third limitation then is, because of the paucity of this intelligence, we're constrained to invent something called time, because we can't grok the entire gestalt with these little 3-pound kind of pieces of meat that we carry between our ears. So we have to break up our experiences into bite-sized pieces and then process them chronologically, thus giving rise to the illusion of time. So that's the third limitation. And then the fourth limitation is that we have amnesia for who we really are or what we've come to do. There's a beautiful story in the Hebrew tradition that before the child is born, the angel of birth called Ayala, it pinches the nostrils of the baby and makes an indentation on the upper lip. And that's why you have indentations here and here. And it is to create amnesia for who you really are and what you've come to do. So there are some of the limitations. Now, in the middle of that kind of volunteering for incarnation, it seems to me that we create what I call preconception contracts. We create agreements among souls, disincarnate souls at this stage, as to what kinds of relationships we're going to play and what kind of missions we're going to have as we incarnate the next time. Now, I think once we come in, and we adopt these spacesuits of ours, these three-dimensional spacesuits, it's improv theater. There is no plot and there is no script. There's not a predetermined plot that we're following out, and there's not a script that we're mouthing. Otherwise, we'll be just kind of robots, pre-programmed for particular kinds of actions. So there's no plot and there's no script. It is improv theater. What we do know is we know the kind of the track histories of everybody whom we are going to encounter, in this incarnation coming down. I know my own track history, what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are, and I know the strengths and the weaknesses of everybody else whom I'm going to encounter in the incarnation. We also know, I believe, what the present circumstances are. Just as I am about to parachute into incarnation, I know the present circumstances of the family into which I'm coming, into the culture of which I'm going to come, and also of the global situation, the kind of the geopolitical situation into which I'm going to parachute. So I know all these as a soul as I come in. And I know what my mission is. And then finally, it seems to me that Grandmother God whispers my secret, sacred name as I wing my way into incarnation. And then I arrive, and at that stage, it's improv theater. Now, improv theater is interesting. I had a client one time who was a professional actor, and he told me there are 2 rules to improv theater. The first rule is you have to work with any line that your partner throws at you on stage. You can't say, oh, that's a dumb line, give me another line, you can't work with that. Whatever line your partner speaks on stage, you got to work with it. That's the first rule. And the second rule is you should feed your partner lines that are going to make her look good. You play to her strengths, and then the play will take off and be a real success. And it seemed to me this is a really great way of looking at life. You have to work with whatever lines life is throwing at you, and your job is to try to make everybody around you look good by feeding them kinds of lines that they can really work with. Now, as we're caught then in this kind of conundrum of time, one of the things we have to wrestle with at a mental level and at a heart level is how do we regard time? Is time a linear process for us where we go from the past to the present to the future? Or do we believe it's kind of cyclical? So do we believe there was a Lemuria, there was an Atlantis, there are yugas? In Gaelic, we have a term called Tír Fáthán, which means the land under the waves. We call it also Tír na nÓg, the land of the ever young. And there's the belief system that the Celts, and the earlier peoples that colonized Ireland, the Tuatha Dé Danann, the people of the goddess Dana, originally came from Atlantis. So are we going around in some kind of a cycle? I believe rather time is a kind of a spiral activity, that we kind of re-encounter the same kinds of issues as individuals, as communities, and as a global family. But each time, if we do it well, we're kind of doing it more and more adroitly. So we're kind of spiraling upwards. And at some stage, I think the spiral goes asymptotic, which means there's an infinite amount of progress in zero amount of time. And for me, I believe that is our function at this stage in human history. So I look at 7 different timelines then. I think there are 2 versions of the past, 2 versions of the present, and 3 versions of the future. So the 2 versions of the past are what really happened, in human history, and we're products of what really happened. That's one version of the past. The second version of the past is, what we're told happened, because history is written by the winners. So we're told what happened, and we're products of that story as well, even if it's made up. There are 2 versions of the present. One is what's really happening in our world right now, and we're products of that, and we're reacting and responding to that. And the other one is the propaganda, and we're responding and we're being activated by that as well. So there are 2 versions of the present, what is really happening, and the propaganda we're told is currently underway. And then there are 3 versions of the future. There's the kind of the probable future, there's the possible future, and there's the predetermined future. Now, I do not believe in the notion of a predetermined future. If there's a predetermined future over which we have no control, then we're just robots and we're wasting our time. So there's no free will at that stage, and there's no possibility of evolution or advancing. So I do not believe in a predetermined future. I believe rather there are two possible, there's the possible future and the probable future. The probable future is what's going to happen if we don't change what we're doing as individuals and as communities. The possible future is what could emerge, if we make the right kind of choices. And so for me then, our job at this stage is to create the possible future, by creating cosmologies for ourselves and for our world that make sense to us. So I think we have to dispense with what I call the tyranny of time. And we have to realize that there are parallel tracks. So I believe, for instance, that every soul creates several avatars, and injects them into some part of human history simultaneously. It is like an actor who's, taking part in several different movies at the same time. The individual characters in the individual movies have no idea of the other characters in the other movies, but the actor herself or himself knows exactly what the characters are in which movie. And he's not going to identify with the avatars. He's going to identify with the actor, who's taking part in playing these particular kinds of roles. So at that stage, we have to really realize that, there's a cross-pollination that happens between these parallel tracks, between these simultaneous parallel lifetimes that we're playing as souls. So I believe that they cross-pollinate in our dream state when we're dreaming at night. We're cross-fertilizing the learnings from the simultaneous incarnations that we're experiencing. And so you'll find often that you report a dream of the night and you say, I had this dream last night and I was in my home, the home I grew up in, but it actually didn't look like my home. In fact, it didn't look anything like my home, but I knew it was my home. And the reason you knew it was your home was it's a home in a different track and it's cross-fertilizing. So when we develop altered states of consciousness or have visionary experiences, then, we're learning, we're parallel processing from all of these things. And the final thing I want to say, if I have time in this section, is to look at our languaging. Language is really, really important. So I think the greatest linguist of the 20th century was a Swiss guy called Ferdinand de Saussure. And he said, oral language is composed of three different parts. What he called the referent in the real world, and then the signified, which is the image I create in my mind, and then the signifiers I use to kind of communicate what's in here to you. So if I'm walking in the bush in East Africa and I encounter a pachyderm, with a huge long proboscis and huge big tusks, and I'm seeing it for the first time, now, so that's the reference in the real world. That's the object in the real world. But I create this image in my mind. It's a multi-modality image. So it may be part visual, part olfactory if I can smell it, part tactile if I reach out to it, part acoustical if it makes a noise. So I've got this signified in my head, which is, I believe, a representation of the referent in the real world. And now I try to communicate that to you. And depending on what language I'm going to use, if I'm speaking English, I'll call it an elephant. If I'm speaking Swahili, I'm going to call it Ndovu. If I'm speaking Kalenjin, I'm going to call it Beliot. So I'm going to use different signifiers to kind of try to represent the signified to you using signifiers. Now, the issue is there are problems at every stage of this process. We have absolutely no guarantee that the signified in my mind is an accurate representation of the referent in the real world. And philosophy calls this the myth of the given. This kind of this fallacy that our mental images correspond precisely with what's in the world outside there. And we're beginning to realize that very, very strongly from quantum mechanics, the realization of what's called the observer effect. That is observation that calls kind of reality into being. So that's the problem that we cannot prove that the signifieds in my head actually represent the referent in the real world. And then comes the problem of, I'm going to now try to communicate that to you using signifiers. But I have no idea whether the word I'm using is understood by you in the way in which I'm using the word. So there's a breakdown in the signifiers as well. There's no guarantee that I'm communicating to you even the signified that I have in my head, which is in itself, I have no guarantee is a representation of the referent in the real world. And so some form of telepathy then, where I can download at least the signified from mind to mind and kind of bypass the problem of the signifiers. And then ultimately the possibility that it could be possible to kind of telepathically transfer the actual referent itself without the use of signified even, let alone signifiers. And I think that is the journey of the great mystics, the Jesus Christ and the Buddha figures of time, and where we're headed in our own evolutionary trajectory. The ability at some stage to be able to transfer not just the representation of the referent, but the referent itself from my mind to your mind and from my heart to your heart. I leave it at that, Michael.
Thank you, Seán. Just a thrill to be on this call with you, and thank you for all that information. Seán's really given us this very wonderful overview of what's possible in these models for present and future evolution. So we're going to stand up and just move the body for a minute or so. And this is it, folks. Just customize this movement. It's your favorite stretch, your favorite movement, whatever you'd like. And as you do this, why don't you just breathe in what's just been shared with you from Father Seán. Take that in and consider the evolution of the species. Consider your evolution. What does your evolutionary future look like? What is your evolutionary destiny? And if you'd like to express it in movement, just feel into what this evolutionary body that you can choose, multiple bodies, just express that to yourself and to all of us. Nice. All right. Thank you for that. And you'd like to come back to a nice, comfortable, seated position. So first and foremost, welcome to the ITP Palo Alto community. Also, welcome to other ITP practitioners from all over the country that have joined us. We're so happy that you're here. And as Michael said, we'd really like you to use the chat. This is a interactive presentation for Father Seán and I. We want to hear from you. We want your feedback. We want your comments, your observations, questions, inquiry. Please use the chat, and then we'll have a Q&A session shortly after this. So we're talking about this evolving body, the evolving species, who we are now and who we're going to be. And I don't know that everybody from outside of Palo Alto got this particular document. It's George's Possible Bodies of Our Continuing Evolution. It's fascinating. George wrote this some time ago and he shared it with us, but it's an opportunity to look at some examples from the founders of this practice as to what they view the future is going to look like. And ITP, by the way, has, there's multiple lenses that we look through. One of them is this work can be either restorative, which is you have an issue, you come to ITP, you work on it through these transformative practices and work through it. The other is aspirational, which is not so much an issue, but reaching for the stars, being the best you can be. So today and next Saturday, we hope to have this be an aspirational conversation. And yes, it's true, we do inhabit multiple bodies. We experience a myriad of emotions. We have access to numerous levels of consciousness. As we found out, as we see in the kata, there's lots of us going on inside each one of us. And we now have the opportunity to sort of sculpt and shape our bodies and our beings. So consider for a moment, if you would, how you relate to yourself right now. Just take a moment, drop in. What does that look and feel like? And then perhaps the possibilities these conversations and experiences might open up for you. Just stay open to the information that's being shared. And so one intention that we have is to flow this information through the prism of ITP's 4 legs, which are theory and philosophy and worldviews, practice, community, and science and research. And another intention is to look at this through another lens, the lens of the Greek term antikoluthia, the mutual entailment of the virtues. Simply put, one area of development stimulates all areas of development in body, mind, heart, and soul. Aerobic exercise enhances cognitive development. Strength training creates emotional well-being. So emotional well-being brings insights and peace to the body and expands our consciousness. So we're doing some cross-training. And so these are a few lenses we're going to look at as we talk about the evolution of the species, which, as Seán said, has already occurred and is still occurring in all parts of body, mind, heart, and soul. Homo sapiens sentient, or excuse me, Homo sapiens sapient is not the end all, not the be all. We're traveling through a continuum. So consider during these two presentations to track your own changes and transformation on a physical level, emotional, and spiritual level. So I want to talk a little bit about the fourth leg of ITP, which is science and research, because empirical validation is very important, and it's one of the things that separates ITP from otherwise out there approaches and philosophies. Post-Darwinian science served to take people away from their religious or spiritual beliefs. It was used to deconstruct faith and wisdom traditions. The new direction of science is aimed at validating these wisdom traditions. And it's also serving to bring people back to their theological roots. So with respect to theory and research, it's sort of flipped, that science fiction right now is the new science. It's become the science of the integral. It's no longer deconstructing wisdom traditions and experiential practice. Rather, it's validating it through empirical data. So Joe Dispenza has a really nice saying, science has become the contemporary language of mysticism. So Michael, if you could bring up the slide. And Adelaide, if you're there, I'm going to ask you to read the slide. This is Synoptic Empiricism. This is from Future of the Body. And this is the type of validation through science that we're really looking at. Adelaide, would you mind?
Sure, no problem. Synoptic Empiricism. Synoptic or integral empiricism is the acquisition and verification of data from mainstream science, psychical research, comparative studies of religious experience, and other fields that are ordinarily kept apart by scientists and scholars. This approach utilizes experience acquired through sensory, kinesthetic, and extraordinary modalities.
Thank you, Michael. So this is what we're doing, folks, in ITP. And what we're experiencing now, what we're doing through practice, long-term practice, is an early on approach, I think a rather visionary approach to Michael and George. So what Synoptic Empiricism does is it offers a new understanding of the nature of multiple forms of intelligence and their impact on transformation. It's research-based evidence that substantiates ITP's practice. And what I'd like to do is to talk about 3 areas of intelligence through which this new science directly supports ITP and other integral practices. And we'll be talking about this through the 3 sessions. Well, I want to talk about the brains of the head, the heart, and the hara. So we're going to talk a little bit later on about the cranial brain and neuroplasticity, somatic plasticity, the heart, the emotional brain, heart math, which Roger Marsh has talked about, and heartfulness, which we'll be talking about, and the hara, the belly brain, the enteric nervous system. There's a whole new world of science called neurogastroenterology. In the East, this is considered to be hara consciousness. So I want to talk about this understanding of the evolution of Homo sapiens sapien. These higher forms of intelligence and evolution have been given lots of other names: Homo spiritualis, Homo universalis, many more. Mine is Homo sapiens sentient, more feeling, intuitive, wise being. But whatever our species goes, wherever it's headed, the significant difference through integral practice is that we have the opportunity to take theory into practice and embody these new iterations of ourselves. We can literally train into these new forms and take theory into practice. And that's pretty fascinating, that we have the opportunity to actually materialize consciousness. This is a big one, and it's something for you to consider. We do that through affirmations. We do that through our 9 commitments, 9 principles. We do that through ITP practice. So with all that's been discussed so far, let's get some feedback from all of us, and we'll turn this over to Michael.
Okay, so we're open for questions now. Please raise your Zoom hand or wave at the screen, or put your questions in the chat.
So appreciative, Father Seán, that you're with us today, and Barry, it's just great, and anybody else that's new here today, thank you for coming. And the questions I have are those are both what you guys just shared are beautiful models. So I'm gonna play with some questions. so I'm gonna just kind of throw it out here. I have 2 questions. One is, how do you know what you know, and who is the knower? So, and I'll start with Seán, and then Barry, if you want to jump in after.
Thanks. Thanks, Kevin. So there's a whole branch of philosophy which is called epistemology, and epistemology is answering precisely that question: how do we know what we know? And my answer is that there are 3 ways basically that we know what we know. The first way is that we take the word of some perceived expert, whether it's a scientist or a teacher in school or a priest or a newspaper or a television set, that people get a lot of their alleged knowledge, from experts. So that's the first way that we know what we know. The second way we know what we know is by personal experience. You've had an experience yourself. If you have never tasted rum raisin ice cream and you ask me, what does rum raisin ice cream tell you? I can't explain it to you. You've got to taste it for yourself. And so the second way we know what we know is through personal experience. And the third way we know what we know is by figuring stuff out on our own. There are various pieces of the jigsaw puzzles scattered throughout the world in all these different disciplines and all these different cultures and all these different relationships. And we put these pieces together in a very unique fashion, and we create what I would call a personal cosmology of it. So in some senses, they're the ways in which we actually know what we know. Now, who is the knower? There's a beautiful teaching in Buddhism that differentiates between Turiya and Turiyatita. Turiya is the witnessing consciousness. It is that part which has not completely identified with incarnation, but is observing it. Hinduism will call that Atman, as distinct from Jiva, which is the part that incarnates. And so the witnessing consciousness observes, what the participant is doing. In cultural anthropology, it's called the participant observer. So the Turiyatita is where you not only witness as a soul what your avatar is doing in incarnation, but you're actually being the best version of your avatar you can possibly be. And so, you're walking 2 feet. One is an incarnated being, and the other is the kind of disincarnate kind of a soul self. So it's Atman and Jiva. It's Turiya and Turiyatita. It is the source self versus the kind of the role self. So it becomes very important then that I play my role to the best of my ability, but that I not identify with it, because ultimately that's a role I'm playing as my effort to kind of evolve my soul, and much more importantly, my effort to be of benefit to other souls who are playing their parts as well. So I'll go over to Barry at this stage.
Well, everybody, when we were prepping for this, I told Seán that I wanted him to answer everything because he's so wise, for Pete's sakes. I'll take my attempt at this. First off, great question. And I think we have to separate knowing from intelligence and wisdom, smartness and so when we talk about knowing, it really is that we differentiate that. If knowing is feeling, then perhaps it's a little more body-based. If we derive our wisdom, if we receive it, perhaps from a field, from a larger field, then this is some other way to look at it. And so it sort of ties into this who is the knower, because it depends on the frame of consciousness, the liminal consciousness that we're in and how we perceive it. I agree with Seán that at a very high level, we move into this witness state. We identify with our everyday selves. We move into our higher selves. And this is the idea of this evolution of the species and this ability to adapt and create new bodies. Great question.
Thank you.
Great answer, Barry.
You
Thanks,
too,
Barry.
Seán. I'm drafting you, brother.
Great. So I have a question here from Roger, and then we'll go to Adelaide. What is the purpose or reason of being of these forces against synoptic empiricism? For example, there is no God. There's nothing but the physical.
I'm fascinated by the notion of, I'm learning a lot of this from Michael, to distinguish between Lucifer and Ahriman and create Christ consciousness. So if you look at, for instance, geometrical shapes, and you take two circles which are overlapping, the overlap in mathematics, we call it the intersection set in set theory. So the overlap looks like an oval, but for me, it looks like a vulva, because in some senses, it is the kind of the entry point, or it is the portal into a kind of the next stage of cosmic consciousness. So if you take the two circles, one representing light and the other representing dark, light is not all good and dark is not all bad. And in the Celtic dispensation, this is very, very important for us as Celts in our cosmology, that the darkness is not that which annihilates light, it's that which conceives, gestates, and gives birth to life. And so we talk about the gods and the goddesses, that the goddesses are the archetypes of nature and the gods are the archetypes of culture. And then there's this overlap. And so when you overlap these two circles and you create what's in geometry called the vesica, and what I would call a portal or a vulva, it is the overlap between the dark and the light that creates the next stage of a human evolution. If there were no darkness whatsoever, light would become really boring and we'd stagnate. If there were only darkness, we'd lose hope completely, and we'd be completely distraught. So it is the tension between the two, the necessary duality that creates the context in which evolution happens. So it becomes really, really important then that we embrace both for what they have to offer. And that is the cross-fertilization and the opportunity afforded by their intersection that kind of gets us off our asses and the couches and brings us into working for the evolution of the species.
Thank you, Seán. Roger, could you say a little bit more about the question?
Well, I'm pretty satisfied with Seán's answer there. Thank you very much. I'm just looking at, forces in the world. We could say communism, for example, that basically says God is dead. There is no God. The state is the God. We see China basically persecuting anybody that professes to be connected to anything other than the state, because it threatens their authority. So my question is, what's the role of that? Why is that in our world? What's the purpose of it? I'm looking for a worldview and a cosmology that empowers my evolution. I think what Seán laid forward there does that very well, and I appreciate that. But that's the essence of the question. It's this question that we've asked Michael Murphy many times: what is the purpose of evil? You could say.
Yeah.
Or is there even evil on the planet? Isn't even other question. Is that a worldview? Is that a perspective? So this is where it's coming from. I hope that helps a little bit.
No, that's excellent. I would say that all of these theories, philosophies, wisdom traditions, religion, spirituality can be used in a lot of different ways and misused. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk about evolutionary panentheism on the next session, but it posits, one, that evolution is a fact, and secondly, that there is some kind of higher transcendent order. And so that's what synoptic empiricism is all about. It may collide and conflict with some of these other viewpoints, but in an evolving world, you're never going to have a 100% buy-in from anybody. The idea is to create a critical mass of a new evolutionary thrust and approach. And at some point, that really peaks, that hits this tipping point, and things happen. And I think we're in the early stages of it. I think in the next 200 years, the integral, this whole approach is going to really take hold.
Great. Thanks, Barry. So we've got 6 more minutes for Q&A. Let's go to Adelaide and then Max. Hopefully we can fit it all in 6 minutes.
Great. So
Adelaide.
what I'm going to bring up is going to put a smile on Michelle's face. I'd say that one of the consequences of working with the ITP worldview is that I've become significantly more embodied, which has had many advantages. And over the last decade, also working with gratitude as an energy. And I find it I'm very interested in the energies that facilitate transformation, or let's say transition to the ability to get out of one state that's all clotted, and maybe you could use different metaphors, rise above it, see it from a different perspective. I'd just be interested to hear both of you, Barry and Seán, muse about gratitude as an embodied place of movement and freedom, or maybe you think it's something else. Go.
Maybe I can start with that because I love the question, and it's right in the ITP vernacular. And how do we work with energy? And how do we recognize that we're in one place and perhaps want to move to some other place? So that's what these practices are all about, because whatever we've been doing, the way we've been acting, we've been creating ourselves over decades. And it's hardwired. We're going to talk about that with neuroplasticity. It's in our body. So since this is a body-based practice, and since we espouse that the body is a teacher, a lot of this energy work, when George simply states we are energy beings, is about controlling, regulating, and moving our energy. And so part of it is to recognize on a body, mind, heart, soul level, if we're in one place and we're experiencing anger, upset, or frustration, to really notice it, to get into your body, to ground yourself, get stable, and then move into some of these other bodies. And Adelaide, you've done some great presentations on gratitude. So gratitude is an attitude, but it's also a body. And it has a physical location, a sensation. There's certain emotions with it. So I want to call our affirmation work mantras. And just as we, in meditation, get distracted, we witness that we're distracted, we come back to our mantra. And so the same thing is true in what you're talking about. We're always going to move into these different places. The fact that we feel sorrow or anger is not bad. It's part of the human condition. But we also have an opportunity to live into emotions and bodies of our choice. Seán, how about you?
Great, beautiful. So I just pick up on that a little bit and deal directly with the notion of gratitude, Adelaide. So I believe that, I had a discussion with somebody a few weeks ago, and my response was this. He said he was grateful, but he was feeling hopeless about the future. And what I said to him was this, of the two virtues, hope and gratitude is by far the more important, because hope is a kind of a fear-tinged expectation for the future, whereas gratitude is a love-saturated celebration of the present. And so for me, gratitude is primary here, more important even than hope. And the thing for which, I can't ever get away from is my own physicality. I carry it everywhere I am. And so if I'm going to start with gratitude, a prayer of gratitude, it should start literally with my physical body, the container, the spacesuit that I agree to inhabit for this incarnation. So the constancy of realizing that every breath is a miracle, that every heartbeat is a miracle, that every kind of that thing that comes into my sensorium is a miracle. So hanging out in gratitude is even much more important than, hanging in there by my fingernails onto some kind of a hope that things will get better.
I think, Seán, to add on to what you say, we have a choice in all of this.
Right. Yeah.
We're not slave to what's happened in the past, although we have to recognize what has happened in the past. We're in the present, and we can create a beautiful future for us right here in the present moment.
I think the word joy deserves a place in there, but let's leave it at that, which is so different from happiness.
Right.
As I've said many times, give up all hope for a better past.
Great. So I know Max had a question. We're going to have another Q&A session after this next phase. So I'm going to come back to you, Max, with your question then. So we're going to turn it over to Barry right now for this next phase of our program.
Thank you, Michael. So we've been talking about these bodies, and you know, this is a little different concept. And I want to just talk a little bit about the word embodiment, which the actual definition is giving a body to something. So I'm not suggesting that we're on borderline schizophrenia here, but we have an ability to move in and out of our bodies in a practiced approach. So a quick definition of a transformative practice, which is the basis for a lot of these transitional changes that we can make. It's a complex and coherent series of exercises. It produces positive changes in a person or a group. So these changes are underscored by this relatively new science of neuroplasticity. So I want to talk about the cranial brain. So neuroplasticity, a quick definition for all of you: the brain's ability to reorganize and grow itself throughout life by creating new neural networks and neurons and synapses through gene expression. The science demonstrates that epigenetic influences, meaning influences that are outside the genes and many times outside the body, some of which can be environmental, cause the genes to fire and create new growth. This is pretty cool. It sort of ends this whole notion of genetic determinism. Gee, I'm stuck with my genes. This is the way I am. So these firings show up in the form of new neurons, new neural networks, and our ability to transform is just the opposite of this past worldview. Now, the present studies about neuroplasticity are cranial, they're brain oriented, but I want to share the term somatic plasticity. Some of you have heard that before. The entire body is plastic and mutable. The best evidence? Ourselves. We've grown our bodies over time. We started as an embryo. We grew and developed. We have the power to heal ourselves. If none of this occurred, we wouldn't be here. So the body adapts, it changes constantly. And these new neurons, neural networks, come from the genes firing. I want you to understand this. The genes are sort of halfway between epigenetics and cellular change. They're expressing themselves and creating change at a subcellular level. What causes them to fire is what's really important. Some of the most powerful drivers of gene expression are positive emotions, physical sensations, and evocative memories. They can turbocharge bodily change. And also other things, other epigenetic influences, a constellation of anticoluthian integral practices, family of origin, the environment, climate change, extinction events like we've seen in the past and perhaps are concerned about what's going right now. An infinite number of factors, and all this facilitates the materialization of consciousness. And that's something we're going to talk about, materialized consciousness. So I'm going to give you a little metaphor because many of you have seen the marvels of a 3D printer. These printers literally create 3D dimensional objects one layer at a time. They're very cool. And they typically receive instructions from source code coming from a computer, and they use their printer heads to print out objects back and forth, back and forth. They're loaded with a liquid substance that are applied layer by layer. And I'm going to suggest that our bodies are 3D printers. We're continuously printing and reprinting ourselves depending upon the source code, which in this case is epigenetic and outside the genes. These are the positive emotions and evocative memories that we previously discussed. The printer heads are the genes themselves, which express themselves together by creating new neural networks. These are new memories, new learnings, new cellular growth, billions of which are created in a short time. And when we have a learning opportunity like this, in this short session, billions of which are being created.
Barry, do you want the video?
So yeah, Michael, if you wouldn't mind, let's bring up the video. We're going to sort of do it in pieces because we have this video of what appears to be, and let's just stop it right there. That's a 3D printer. It goes side by side and it drops down through instructions through a computer, various layers. You can go ahead and turn it on a little bit more, Michael. And things are created, 3D things are created. Plastics, hardware, they're now equally, you can stop right there, looking at creating body parts through 3D printers. I've seen buildings constructed from 3D printers. So we're going to look at the body as a 3D printer, and we're going to look at what turbocharges our genes. It's these positive emotions, evocative memories, all of which ITP is offering. And so this is the right there. That's, we can stop it. We're going to have a double helix. It's our printer head inside of us. It's printing. So if you can go ahead and if you want to hit the forward button, these are epigenetic influences that come through our double helix, positive emotions, evocative memories. And at the bottom, you can see these are new neural networks. New neural connections, new neurons that are being created literally in this moment. So it's a little video to perhaps inform you that we are printing ourselves. And then the question is, who's doing the printing? Where's that coming from? Is this materialized consciousness? I want to have Michael bring up one other slide. This is from a presentation by Joe Dispenza. This is an electron microscope. And I think we can start it on, what is it, 48?
Yep.
There we go.
Every time you learn something new, this is what's happening in your brain, geniuses. If you learned one bit of information today, your brain did this. Boom. That's learning. Physical evidence as a result of your interaction in the environment. Every time you learn something in your brain, there's a physical change that takes place, and learning is making new connections. Are you with me? This is how fast it happens, too. That's learning. If you learn anything this week, you've made a footprint. If learn...
Thank you, Michael. So, graphic demonstration of what's really happening at the very deepest level, our very core. And as we're talking, and as we're sharing, and as we're practicing, we're in the body building business. We're creating, literally creating new bodies, new neural networks, new memories, new cellular levels. It's quite fascinating. So I'm just going to ask some inquiry questions for everybody right now. The first is, what is being demonstrated here in your mind, in your view? Is this something that shows perhaps how mutable we really are? Perhaps our understanding of consciousness has slipped the bounds of the physical body. The non-locality of consciousness. Are we in fact a satellite antenna receiving energy and messages from the field? Can we channel our consciousness to create bodily change? We always have. These species started off as something different than Homo sapiens sapiens. And so perhaps we can look at the body as a handy metaphor for the universe, the rise and fall of the breath, the expansion and contraction of the universe. Our biology and the rhythms of the cosmos are one. And most importantly, we find ourselves on the threshold of a new species. In my view, Homo sapiens sentient, a more intuitive feeling and wise being, and many more expressions of this new species. What's remarkably different from all of these depictions of these new bodies and new approaches to our species is that we have the ability to practice into this and train into developing new bodies, new parts of ourselves. We can literally shape and form and sculpt ourselves. And so in ITP, this is the promise. This is our evolutionary birthright, is to evolve, and that we can actually, we can actualize theory into practice and affirm and embody what it is that we wish to be. So this conscious universe that we live in is continually recreating itself. We do through ITP embrace this view of evolutionary panentheism, that there is a transcendent order. You can call it God or Buddha or Allah, the Akashic record, morphic resonance, the biofield, a variety of other names given by most religions, spirituality, or wisdom traditions. Evolutionary panentheism states that we are one with this transcendent order. I am one with that. In another wisdom tradition, Morihei Ueshiba, was the founder of Aikido, stated proudly, I am the universe. It wasn't egotistical. It was a recognition of his cosmological origins. So consider all this as we ponder our personal evolution and our vast untapped abilities to recreate ourselves. What is your evolutionary destiny? What does your next future really look like? Just take a moment and let that sink in and consider where you are in your life right now and where you would like to go. Thank you. And a quick, wonderfully, George, just a brilliant writer, George Leonard. He stated, the galaxies exist in you, not printed out as mere images within your skull, but in your every cell, your every atom. So Michael, I think we have a moment. Can you bring up the slide? And I'm going to ask Seán, would you mind reading this slide?
Neurotheology, the emergent science of understanding that our religious or spiritual beliefs create neuroplastic changes in the brain, which in turn create changes in our theological worldview.
These, again, are parts of the new science that's validating the expressions of our future species, of what we long for, of what we aim for, of what ITP is talking about, what it has to offer. And it's being done in a non-dogmatic way. Each one of us has the opportunity to identify who we are and where we want to go in the support of a loving community. So I'm glad we're all on this ride together, and consider that the science is now showing us a lot about consciousness, a lot about where we come from. Do we just live and die? Is that it? Is it over at that point? Are we reflections of the universe? Are they in fact reflected through our cellular levels, through creating our new bodies over and over again? How much of the past has to do with who we are, and do we have a hand in who we want to be and who we aspire to be? I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Barry. I'm going to turn it over to Father Seán now.
So I wanted just to quickly to look at the notion of biocentrism. So when you look at the trajectory of human history, for 99.999% of human history, people believed, in a supernatural being or some kind of, mystery behind physical life. And then with the kind of the Industrial Revolution, particularly in the 1800s, beginning with kind of the scientific revolution in the 1600s, there was a movement to kind of look at life as if it was just material expression, that there was nothing beyond matter. So all of materialistic science emerged from it. But now very, very recently, within the ranks of the great scientists themselves, there's this movement towards biocentrism, bio meaning life, so that both the theory that life, our consciousness, is the origin from which all matter, including the physical brain, emerges. So it's the difference between a television set and a ball game. If you're watching the Super Bowl on your television set and the TV breaks down, it doesn't mean that the Super Bowl has ground to a halt. Simply that the receptor that you're using to translate kind of electromagnetic signals into an audio and a visual kind of format, isn't working anymore. So this realization then that consciousness is primary. and that everything else is an expression at some level of densification of this consciousness. So when you think about how we normally regard reality, very, very typically it starts like this. We have a sensorium, which we believe that delivers data to us from outside, from the real world. And these senses then bring it into our brain. And then the brain acts as a kind of a perception processor. It takes those data and it turns it into perceptions. And then those perceptions become an experience. And then the experience goes into your memory bank. And then your memory bank creates your personal reality, your model of reality. Now, when you live in a community, then there's kind of the intersection set between all of these personal models of reality create a consensual model of reality. So that there's the intersection set of the reality models of all the people in the community. And thereafter, once a child has been educated into the cultural reality or the cultural trance, it becomes very hard to experience that which the culture tells you does not exist. It becomes increasingly difficult, that you're kind of straitjacketed into saying this and only this is real. Everything else is a hallucination, or you're losing your mind. And so we have to break out of that model then in the realization that reality is a multi-tiered phenomenon, and that our version of reality, or our perception, or our experience of reality is based upon the state of consciousness in which we find ourselves. So when we have the technology and the practices that allow us, whether it's an ITP practice or a religious practice or a yoga practice or a physical practice that create altered states of consciousness in us, then we have access to different levels of this reality model. So I can just speak then for a few minutes about my own experiences in altered states of consciousness. I've been meditating since I was 18 years of age. I'm 77 now, so basically it's about 60 years of meditation, and having the privilege of learning 6 different languages and living in 3 different continents, in Europe, in Africa, and in the United States of America. And so that alone will create altered states of consciousness where you're in touch with radically different cultures and radically different conceptual versions of reality. So I had a very powerful vision, in fact, just in September gone by. I was really sick for some reason, and when I get sick, I get really bad fevers. And when I get a fever, I go into an altered state of consciousness. This happened to me at least once a year when I was in Kenya, and I got malaria, and I would have these fevers. And the upside of every fever was I would have these visionary experiences. So this most recent one, I saw creation happening in 3 stages. And the first stage, God was self-fracturing. Because if God is all that exists, then no experiences are possible. If there's nothing outside of God, no relationships are possible and no experiences are possible. So God self-fractures into what the Kabbalah will call a netzotzim, sparks of the divine, what we might call souls. So that for me was the first act of creation that I saw, the splitting of God into multiple facets, sparks of itself. The second was then that these God and these souls got together and they had a great conference. And they said, what can we do for fun? If we're here to generate experiences for you, how can we best do it? And the agreement was, let's create a cosmos. And so they create this cosmos and possibly other cosmoses as well. So this was the first kind of act of source, and the fractals of source getting together in a creative fashion. So they create this cosmos. And for however long that existed, they got together again in a 3rd meeting, and they decided, is there some way that we as souls can participate in this cosmos and not just witness how it is evolving? So they decided that we would create avatars that would allow us to actually participate in this cosmos and in various levels of the densification of this cosmos, and so generate experiences for God. And that's what happened, I believe, that creation happened in these create stages. On building on that then experiences I've had years and years and years ago, the first one I saw souls, coming in front of God and volunteering for different incarnational missions. And this great soul, whom I would call Gaia, volunteered and said to God, send me to that rock, that 3rd rock from the sun in that solar system. And I will dedicate myself to throwing up a life form until a life form emerges that is capable of recognizing its own divinity and ipso facto the divinity of all other creatures with which it shares the planet. And it said about it that she volunteered 4.6 billion years ago. 3.7 billion years ago, she began the practice of actually trying to create a biosphere. Now, with the advent of Homo sapiens sapiens, a species exists, possibly not for the first time, but as far as we're concerned, it seems to be, that is actually capable of recognizing its own inner divinity, and ipso facto, the divinity of every bunny rabbit, every oak tree, and every mountain that we encounter. So that was the first of many, many visions. The second one, I had a vision of a pregnant planet, and I was seeing it in silhouette, and it was like the universe was pregnant with the planet Earth, and I could see the belly, and I could see the Earth within it. And there were these, millions of umbilical cords tying the mother to the planet. And there was this liquid flowing through the umbilical cords. Sometimes it looked really gunky and dark, and sometimes it looked pristine and glistening. And a voice said to me, this is what happens. Every thought you have, every word you speak, every action you engage in, creates the consistency of this liquid. And sometimes you're poisoning your mother by your thinking and acting and speaking, and sometimes you're vivifying her. And so it becomes really important then that you take control of that which you think, that which you say, and that which you speak. Because literally the health of the planet is dependent upon that. The next one I had this vision of the planet, and there was a lattice of light workers surrounding it. So at every line of longitude and every line of latitude where they intersected, there was a beam of light stationed, and one at the North Pole and one at the South Pole. And so I calculated finally, that was 64,442 beings of light. Now, that's a symbolic number. But what it means is that we're not alone in this battle, that either higher versions of ourselves, light-filled bodies of our own, or else other beings who are more advanced than us, are not stuck in 3D density, that they're there to help and to create, light workers that will help us in this evolutionary shift. And the final one I had, and that I want to mention was on the 12th of December, 2012, there's a river that flows through my property, and I spend a lot of time down there. And I used to go down there with my dog when she was still alive, Kayla. And I'm going down there one day, and there's a creek called Pina Creek flowing through it. And there's somebody sitting on the banks of the river with his feet dangling in the water. No, I have never met anybody down there. It's in the middle of the forest. I'm the only person up here. And he's sitting on the bank, and he's got a kind of a piece of grass in his mouth, and he's just chewing on it. And he looks like a farmer from Oklahoma, real laid back kind of guy. And I sit down beside him, and I pluck a piece of grass, I put it in my mouth, and I'm chewing as well. And in my mind, I think, I wonder if he's going to tell me a story. And he turns to me, and speaking aloud, he says, yes, I will tell you a story. He said, I'm a being for a very different part of this universe. And part of my function is to seed life throughout the cosmos in different solar systems and different planetary systems. And I see the same trajectory happen again and again and again. When I sow life and I come back and I weed it, and I fertilize it and I water it and I genetically modify it, everything proceeds according to plan until we give it the gift of free will. And I can predict precisely where the trajectory is going to take itself until we introduce free will into the equation. And at that stage, all bets are off. I can never predict where it's going to go once free will has been introduced into the equation. And he said to me, and I can tell you that your planet at this stage, Homo sapiens sapiens, is at a trifurcation point, not a bifurcation point, a trifurcation point. And he named the three pieces. The first one he called Homo sociopathicus. There are the people who are trying to grab the resources of the planet, including the human resources of the planet, and utilize them for their own benefits. And the second group is, he called it Homo artificialis. There are kind of robotic, pre-programmed robots that will serve Homo sociopathicus, human beings who've been turned into machines. And the third one he called Homo spiritualis. And he said, these are the people who are waking up to their true, their own divinity. And your job is to be a part of that group, to be part of Homo spiritualis, that you can awaken other people to what the depredations of Homo sociopathicus and the seduction of Homo artificialis. So that for me is, that is what biocentrism means to me today.
Thank you, Seán.
Wow. I love that, Seán. you know, the biocentrism is fascinating, and basically everything is everything.
Yes.
And I love your discussion about the celestial meeting that takes place, and I'm wondering how we could get an invitation to that meeting.
You have to be Irish, Barry.
Ah, all right. Well, I'm going to be pseudo-Irish, and I want to join you, Seán. At any rate, folks, thank you for being on this call. You know, we're in experiential practice. The learning's in the body. So I'm going to encourage you to drop everything you're doing and you're writing and lie down, get comfortable. We're going to take a short journey, a little excursion inside. We're going to do some interiority work. And just get in your most comfortable position, standing, sitting, lying, whatever you'd like. And I would like you to close your eyes and identify that part of your body where you feel wisdom and knowledge resides. Where is it? Doesn't matter where, it's just identifying it. And I'd like you to place your hands in that part of your body. Wherever wisdom lives, wherever this deeper intelligence, this knowledge lives. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the sound of the bowl. So when you hear the sound of the bowl, I'd like you to consider the sound of the bowl to be energy. And I'd like you to use that energy and actually press your hands in to that area of wisdom and knowledge and energize it, activate it, bring it more alive. When you no longer hear the sound of the bowl, release your hands. We're going to repeat that for a few times.
Barry, do you have original sound on?
I can try and do that. I'm not sure.
It's up in the upper left corner. We can't hear the bowl unless you do that, or I can ring the bowl here.
There, yeah, there you go.
Okay, can you folks hear this? Let me just ask.
No,
Can you hear that?
No.
no, it
right.
doesn't.
All right.
Like that.
Let's just try real quick.
Here, I can do this.
Yeah, I probably should try and do it. Let's just try. So it's original sound.
You need to have it on.
It needs to be on.
Right.
You need to have gone through the process of
Right.
making that available.
Yeah, and let's see if I can do this. It says original sound is off.
It's a toggle.
Right. Well, I only have original sound. Oh, it's on. Okay. So let's give that a try. So again, if you'd like, close your eyes, find that part of your body with your hands where wisdom lives in, intelligence. When you hear the sound of the bowl, press in its energy, give it some life. Here we go. Just feel the sound of the bowl transmit through your hands as energy and just activate your wisdom and your knowledge. And when you no longer hear the sound, release. And bring your hands in again. And let it go. Just bring your body alive, your internal intelligence. And release. Now in this next move, I'd like you to create the sound of the bowl in your own consciousness. When you hear the sound of the bowl in your own mind, in your own consciousness, bring your hands in. And then when you're ready to no longer hear the sound, release and let them go. Please begin. Bring it in. Let it go. And let's do this one more time. And then, if you would, with your eyes closed, just stay there and just abide in your deep wisdom as you feel into what your new evolutionary body looks and feels like. You're giving yourself a gift of a new body. What is that body? I'd like you to take a journey, perhaps back in time. Did that body ever exist for you, even in a brief moment or a period of time? When was it? Who were you with when this body appeared? What happened or what was said? Just live in this memory. If you don't have one, you can create one. And just notice the feelings of this body you're giving birth to that perhaps was already there. What does it feel like? What are the emotions of this new body? What are the physical sensations of this body? Just give it some life. If it's been there, it's always there. It will always be. And so if you would, take a nice deep breath and very slowly release your hands, open your eyes. And if you'd like, we're going to again spend some more time, about 10 minutes, with sharing an inquiry, any questions. And also, please feel free to share what happened in this induction. What came out of it? Is there something you'd like to affirm, or someone? I will just share my own practice. I think it's important for us to share practices. That I too have this part of me. I call it 7-year-old Barry. I think many of you have heard that, me talk about it. It's a period in my time when it was very difficult. And I've learned to become the compassionate witness to 7-year-old Barry and to be able to hold him. Which is not about disowning him or ignoring him, but it's about recognizing who he was, what he went through, and then understanding that that was me then, and I have a choice in who I am now. So the other part, and we're going to get to this in the second session, is this work around heartfulness, which is understanding our existing emotions and then creating emotions of our own choice, the ones that we choose to live in. There's a very powerful ITP practice around staying current with ourselves.
So let me build on what Barry just said, John. I think part of the problem for us, and I can say this as a psychologist, that we don't go back far enough, that typically we go back into the trauma and we try to make sense of the trauma and have pity for the trauma, which is very important. But if that's as far back as I go, that's going to be a long journey into healing. We go back to the preconception contract, to when we were volunteering for incarnation, and we look at the arrangements we made with the people with whom we made them, and the decision to parachute into planetary life at a particular stage of the world process, and the realization I freely chose, the timing and the family and the culture into which I came, precisely because there were things, first, I needed to kind of learn, and secondly, things I needed to contribute. So if I can go back to that stage, all the vicissitude that I experience at any stage of incarnation will have a context, a much, much larger context. And so I can be kind of traumatized far less when I realize that this was part of an agreement, not the specifics of it, but the opportunities of it in order to grow and to contribute. So we have to go back far enough to make sense of the vicissitude. That's part of the vicissitude. It can happen at any stage of the incarnating process, literally from any part. And for some reason, that was what you chose to do because there were lessons you wanted to learn, and there was a specific contribution that you and only you could make with that kind of that history and that environment into which you kind of parachuted for the first time. So you have a unique contribution to make. And if you go back to the realization that that is what you volunteered for, the vicissitude will lose its power to hold you in its claws.
I want to revisit the trifurcation. I certainly am experiencing that and can see it in my life of the Homo sociopathicus, the Homo artificialis, and the Homo spiritualis. And of course, I'm most interested in cultivating myself and others on this path of Homo spiritualis. And, I've heard Michael Murphy say things like behind every technology is a withering human capacity. And I've heard you say, Seán, that there hasn't been a technology invented by humans that hasn't been weaponized. And so, these are very interesting observations. And there's the siren song of technology, and it's getting louder and louder, and people are raising their hand to have chips implanted and artificial intelligence sing their songs for them. And there's a real uprising here. And my question is, what do you two guys think are the keys, like some of the fundamental keys for facilitating, shepherding, embracing, and really realizing the Homo spiritualis or the Homo sapiens sentient? What are one or two keys that we can be really embracing and living?
So I'll start and then let Barry finish up. So I think the first piece is very important that we educate ourselves on the history of spirituality. Literally, when you look at the very various ways in which esotericism has kind of raised its head throughout history. In Ireland, we have a practice, and when I was a kid, the fire was never allowed to go out. It was turf fires, what you guys here would call peat. And so at night, the mother would cover the glowing embers with ashes, and then go to bed, and she'd be the first person up in the morning, and then she'd blow on it, uncover the ashes and put new turf or peat in it, and it would blaze into life. So there were fires that never went out in homesteads in Ireland for 300 years. Now, I think the mystics among us are the people who have kept those embers alive. They've been persecuted by religions. They're being persecuted now by materialistic, scientism. And so again and again and again, the mystics have shepherded the glowing embers, protected it like a mother with the chicks under her wings. And now it's a time to kind of uncover those ashes and begin blowing upon it again. So we have to have a sense of history that this has happened many, many times. And there were eruptions of this mysticism in Egypt going back thousands of years, among the Jews with Kabbalah, among the Greeks, among the in Buddhism, in Tibet, in China with Lao Tzu, people like that, in modern Europe, with Rudolf Steiner, with the Rosicrucian movement, with the mystical wings of all the great religious traditions. So unless we have a sense of that history, we're gonna feel forlorn. But this has happened again and again and again. And the Easter egg hunt is on. The eggs have been hidden esoterically. Our job is to try to go on an Easter egg hunt and find where they're hidden and bring them together, and then realize it will be so obvious the light they bring that the darkness will dissolve of its own volition.
First off, technology scares us now. AI scares a lot of people. There's nothing wrong with technology. We've always had it. Fire was the technology of its time. So it's really about right use and right action with respect to all of this. And then, Roger, to your point, if this is something that you're interested in, this new species, this new body, then my brother, you know how, embody it. And there's all these ways and means, embody it. If that's what you want to affirm, it's right there for you. And this really is about the evolution of the species, not just in general, but about each one of us. And it's through ITP, it's through these transformative practices. It's through Seán. And Seán, I'm so grateful that you joined us, because we met a long time ago and fell in love in our own way. And here we are, and our paths have been the same and different. And it's just been a real treat and an opportunity to be with everybody this morning.